listening, but weren't going to be able to join. So we told them we'd record it and make it available. So welcome, everybody. My name is Kelvin McCullough. I'm the President and CEO of BioUtah, the trade association in Utah for life science companies. We're very pleased today to be presenting the information here for doing business in the UK. Many of you may be aware that Utah signed an MOU with the United Kingdom for advancing business between our state and the country. And we are very excited about that. And this is the first in what we hope will be a series of other webinars and meetings to help people better understand how they can be involved with doing business in the UK and how UK can better interface with businesses here in Utah. And so we're very pleased today to have some very knowledgeable people with us. I'm going to introduce briefly here Brianna Kolpak, who is the Senior Trade and Investment Officer with the Department for Business and Trade, actually resident in Los Angeles, not in the UK, whereas our other UK visitor is on UK time. So we appreciate having them with us. So Brianna, why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself, and then we'll come back and go to our speakers. So.
Sure thing. Thanks, Calvin. Pleasure to meet you all. Thanks for taking the time this morning, or in Linda's case, this afternoon, almost evening, for joining us on this first in what we hope is a series that we can keep promoting to make sure that we can make business easier between the two of us. I'm your point of contact for anything and everything UK. So I specialize in healthcare and life sciences investment. So whenever you need kind of a point in the right direction, information about, how to access the UK market, clinical trials, grants, fundings, even setting up shop, Department for Business and Trade is your signposter for that. So thanks, Kelvin, for organizing as well, and hope we have a happy webinar.
Thank you, Brianna. And we have as our guest speakers today, Dr. Linda Magee, who's with the Health Innovation and NHS Sector Specialist, Department for Business and Trade in the UK. She knows all things about doing business as a life science company in the UK. So we are excited to hear from Linda, and she's going to do a presentation. And then we're going to hear a few words from James McCullough, who's co-founder and CEO of Renalytix, a Utah company who has had some success in interfacing with the UK. So we will go right to you, Linda, if you'd like to go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you very much indeed, Kelvin, for that kind introduction, although I will limit my capabilities. I think you might have oversold me slightly. Let me just get my screen up. Hopefully, yes, I hope everyone can see that okay.
Yep.
So I'm going to cover quite a lot of ground, give you a basic overview of the UK health market, in particular the National Health Service, and our health innovation ecosystem and the support. These slides and the information on them will be available to you afterwards if you need them, as well as obviously the recording that BioUtah is making. So thank you to BioUtah for this, and let me start. So I'm going to cover the UK opportunity just very generally, an overview of the national health system, something around our health tech regulations and assessment process, market access and procurement. And I am basing this on the notion that most of the audience will be in the health tech rather than biopharma area. But again, that's something we can also help you with. And lastly, the support that's available for innovation, particularly in the public domain. So obviously we consider the UK to be a prime location. You can research, you can deliver and evaluate products and services in the National Health Service and associated academic institutions and others. it serves nearly 67 million people. So, you know, a major marketplace there. And across the board, I mean, you know, various healthcare groups will be better in certain things than others, but across the board, the NHS is considered one of the best healthcare systems. So we would like to invite you to see it as a test bed for global market development. We've got a lot of dedicated infrastructure right across the pathway from research through to adoption, and I'm going to say a little bit more about that later. Our national agencies are working ever more closely together to improve our NHS innovation pipeline and make things easier to get adoption of beneficial technology into the patient as quickly as possible. We've got very significant commercial sector in life sciences leading in Europe, and multiple connected clusters across the UK. So we believe there are options to suit, you know, every type of company, and a very strong government commitment to innovation. We've had 2 sector deals, and we have a life science vision. It's the only sector that has one of these government visions at this time. And actually the 3 billion, which I've got there on the slide, is probably a considerable underestimate. It's a slightly historic figure, but this is the joint investment that's coming through with the government's pledges. So just to focus in on that life sciences vision, it's all about making the UK as attractive as possible for companies like yourself for investment, and to tap into the innovation that we have as well to develop your businesses. It's focused really on being a superpower for science and research, the NHS as an innovation partner, and also a strong and welcoming business environment. There are so-called missions. There's 8 of them, and these are areas where we think not only we have innovative infrastructure and support and expertise, but also areas that we're particularly interested in partnering with and hearing about other innovations from across the globe. And just to mention very briefly some of the very recent highlights of government support, there's an ongoing process for structural changes in our UK pensions landscape and reforms to boost investment in high growth innovative companies. James, I think James is going to talk a lot more and is very knowledgeable on this activity in the UK about raising capital. But I will just mention that there's 375 million future fund, which is a sort of breakthrough fund for R&D intensive UK companies. And that includes life sciences. And also recently announced 520 million sterling in capital grants for medicine manufacturing. And in fact, this is the largest single fund that's ever been announced in the UK's history. So moving on now to the National Health Service. We talk about the National Health Service, but in fact, there are 4 sister organisations within the UK, Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So we have NHS England, and that's 85% of the population. So by far and away the biggest. Then we've got Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So while NHS England might be the obvious place, and I'm going to talk primarily about the infrastructure in England, for some entering the market, Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland could be more advantageous to kick off with. And although they're very similar, there may be certain priorities that will differ slightly in those devolved nations. So the NHS represents about 80% of the UK's healthcare market. We do have private healthcare, and you note there that we've got something nearly 2,500 private hospitals, for example. But primarily it is the National Health Service. This is a simplified overview of how the system works. The funding flow comes through Parliament, and from taxes, money is designated for the Department for Health and Social Care. that money flows down to mainly to the commissioners, and although there is national commissioning, the vast majority goes to commissioning at a local level, sort of a local population level. And this might be something of the order of 1 to 3 million population areas. Also, some of that funding goes to our regulators and guidance organisations, and also to national services. So that might be, for example, the blood and transplant organisation that works at national level. And then the providers in the lower box, the public sector is National Health Service trusts, the hospitals. Also, we have primary care, and then we have some elements of local government for social care. The independent sector is there by itself, but also there are a number of contracts between the NHS and some of the private care providers as well. And there's also the social enterprises and charities. The gateway to the National Health Service for us is through our general practitioners or GPs, unless it's an emergency. So we don't have the sort of direct link to specialist consultants in the way you do in the US, but everything from the NHS perspective goes through the GPs, and you would then get referred on to someone else. And all of that activity, more or less, when it's being supported by the NHS and social care, is within an integrated care system at local level. So that's the body that brings a number of these things together, but certainly the NHS organisations and the local authorities to decide what is required, what needs to be commissioned, what services need to be commissioned for their local population. I think it's also helpful sometimes to explain, who pays for certain things and who provides. So in a primary care setting, that is the National Health. Although a number of us, people don't always realise, but a number of us do pay for things like prescriptions, for dental treatment, for opticians, but it's a special NHS rate. And then that is provided by the independent sector. Our GPs are actually not employed by the NHS. They are private individual businesses, but they are contracted wholly by the NHS. And then we have pharmacists, dentists, and opticians, and so forth. All of our emergency and acute care is via the NHS and provided by our NHS trusts, which are usually collections of hospitals. Planned and elective care, again, through the NHS trusts, but also sometimes via the independent sector, paid for by central government, sometimes private medical insurance, sometimes by individuals on a one-off basis. But as I say, that private area is the smaller part of our healthcare system. And then sometimes long-term and social care is paid for by local authority, but it's means tested, and so you have to have really quite a low income to be able to claim that. So what are the priorities for the NHS? The last big plan we had was back in 2019, although there has been a subsequent plan sort of post-COVID to look at the elective recovery, because there was a big backlog. But essentially, it's about maintaining or improving quality of care, reducing inequalities. Everyone should be able to get the same care. We have sometimes called something called a postcode lottery, but it's making sure everything is the same wherever you live, and whatever background you come from. Improving efficiency, we very much want technology, particularly, that can help us do the same for the same amount or less. Keeping people out of hospital, which I think is what most people would like as individuals, but also hospital care is expensive, so let's try and reduce that. For the first time in recent budgets, mental health has got a boost in terms of funding, and deemed to be equally important to physical health. The whole prevention and early diagnosis, and we've recently had a lot of money put into diagnostic centres and the purchase of MRI and other forms of diagnostic equipment. and generally improving the patient experience. And very importantly, a number of these priorities, where feasible, are enabled through technology, particularly digital technology. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that the NHS is committed to becoming the world's first carbon net zero health system. And now, in terms of NHS suppliers, there is a weighting of 10%, which includes net zero focus, as well as other sustainability issues. Just a quickie on digitisation in the NHS. There's the formation of so-called virtual wards, or hospital at home, they're sometimes called. And so these are definitely opportunities for remote monitoring, you know, apps, technical platforms and so forth, and wearables, as again, keeping people out of hospital, and if they are in hospital, getting them out as quickly as possible into a home setting. We've got electronic patient records in more or less every NHS trust now. We did lag behind on that, although GPs have been digitised for decades. And also that now spreading to the social care setting. It's been emphasised that electronic systems and clinical decision has got to become support software. It's got to become the norm for all of our clinicians. And just an interesting factoid, the NHS app, which many of us have on our phone, in fact 75% of us, has got more users than Netflix at the moment. So that's something that's being used more and more to engage with your GP and get information and see your record and so forth.
Can we download British movies as well?
Not on the NHS app, but you never know in terms of well-being. Okay, a quick zoom now to the health tech regs and assessment process for market access. Again, I'm focusing on medtech devices, diagnostics and digitally enabled technology. So for the first time last year, we got a medical technology strategy. The NHS spends about 10 billion a year on this, and you can see a little bit of a breakdown on the little picture below. But it's the right product in the right place and at the right price. So this is the mantra around the medtech strategy. And in terms of market access, our standalone regulatory agency now, having exited from the EU, is the MHRA, and it regulates all our medicines, medical devices and blood components. It is the regulator for the market access authorization. So we have a UKCA mark in the UK, which is achieved via UK approved bodies, but I'll come back because of it's interesting. We do accept CE mark. We've got the National Institute of Health Research that can support clinical studies for these authorities. And we have the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence, which in simple language looks at value for money for the NHS. And there are various routes to exist to sell into the NHS for medtech. If it's biopharma, it's a single route. And I'm going to come on a bit in a quick while to the our innovation pathway and the NHS Innovation Service. So back to NICE, which is looking at this value for money and cost effectiveness. It is worth noting that we don't have a formal reimbursement process for medtech, although moving toward a formal process where as possible. We have something called the MedTech Mandate, which was launched a few years back, and it supports reimbursement by providing funding at national level for a period of time, a year or two, for highly beneficial products that tick these three boxes. So they've got to, NICE has got to deem them effective, they've got to be deemed to be cost saving within 3 years, and they've got to be deemed to be affordable to the NHS. And at the moment, that means not exceeding 20 million in the first 3 years. I would highlight something called the early value assessment, which is a more recent development for NICE. And this is a rapid assessment where you've got something that, is looking good, but perhaps hasn't got the entire evidence base required for a full-blown guidance. And that's for digital products, devices, and diagnostics. So that's something worth looking at if you want to engage with NICE.
And I'm sorry, Linda, is the clinical effectiveness data in that EVA program, is that defined as based on UK patients, or is it clinical effectiveness that could be proven in the United States, for example?
I think if the clinical effectiveness has been proved elsewhere, I think that's probably going to be viable in a well-regulated place like the FDA. It will depend a little bit, but I think in terms of, because NICE is looking particularly about cost effectiveness in the NHS, which is obviously a different system from the private healthcare in the US, then there's probably going to be a need to look at some form of evaluation in the UK.
Yes, apologies. Follow-up question there. The $20 million or 20 million pounds
Sterling, yeah.
Cost is for 36 months on a fact-based care
yes.
format, or
yes.
Okay.
That's in the first 3 years. I mean, we have another system, obviously, for similar things when we look at drugs, and there's some special exemptions and things for, say, cancer drugs or the very expensive ones. MedTech, of course, generally will be able to do this, but it's also, when you're looking at preventative and diagnostic medicine, it's about, how do you present the business plan of stopping something that might happen. But NICE can also provide you with guidance or help there. So that's where we are. There's about 15 products have gone on to the MedTech mandate so far. And you can see a list of what they are. Quite a few diagnostics on there. Okay. Just back to the UK CA and CE mark. We do have the UK CE mark, and it's their assessment bodies, and there's a link later lower down on the page. But you can use CE marking at the moment. So if you've already got CE marking, or you're considering that for devices and diagnostics is now, we're still in a transition period before everything's completely finalized, but a CE mark will be okay and will be valid for market authorization in the UK till 2028 or 2030, depending on how they've been assessed in what type of device and what they've been assessed from for CE. And the table below just gives you that idea. So several years worth of potential if you've got a CE mark already. I must stress that things are different in Northern Ireland. I won't go into the details here, but there are different rules because of it being essentially associated a land border with the EU and in Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Just onto some of the advice here. So we have the AI and Digital Regulation Service. It's recognised that if you have a digitally enabled product, there may be regulations and standards in addition to those that come under the MHRA. So that service is there to help you understand those things and covers all that information that you'll need to understand, with regard to data. NICE, that I've just been talking about, they do have an advice service offer. This is distinct from the assessments that they make formally. And I will say also that MedTech doesn't have to go through NICE. They look at all new drugs, but they don't have to look at MedTech. But if you want to really consider the NHS, then you do have to look at NICE for a lot of products. But they can do advice. There's sort of things where they'll go through what evidence you might need. They can do things, we used to call them safe harbour meetings, but health system meetings where you meet with the regulators and you meet with NICE. These things are fee-based in the main, but they are confident that they can do something, to suit every purse or area of development for a company. So just to end on the market access side of things, the NHS does want, good products that will help patients, ideally well evidenced and save money. And it can also be the place where you can test and evaluate them. Now, the one-stop shop for this is the NHS Innovation Service, and I should come back to that in a moment. And these routes to access for medtech, so you can go direct to the trusts or primary care. There's also the NHS supply chain, which is looking to cover approximately 80% of the supply to the NHS. There's national frameworks, and this is where suppliers are pre-qualified, as it were, and then NHS organisations can just look at the list for particular products and services, and perhaps look to get quotes from, say, 3 of these. We've got the wider government and NHS contracts, and those will include also for government local authorities. And I've just put there on that slide, we have an e-tendering portal, and you can sign up as a potential supplier if you've got regulatory cover for your product. And you can also look at, there's on the NHS supply chain, there's also information for people who would like to become suppliers. So just quickly now whiz through innovation landscape. There's a lot on this slide, and there is a wealth of innovation support. This is the, generally speaking, publicly funded research, innovation support. On Innovate UK, this is funding that can be given to innovative companies, non-dilutive grant funding. There's we have catapults, which are also funded through Innovate UK, which are there with specialist areas. So we have one in cell and gene therapy, and we have one in discovery medicine. We also have advanced manufacturing, and they're doing a lot of work in life sciences too. Everything in the green box is some of our data resources, and we have significant, world-class data resources in terms of genetics and so forth. Biobank, Genomics England, we've got Health Data Research UK. Now, all of these potential opportunities to partner with these sources of information and have access to anonymized data that can help product development or, for testing purposes. Cancer Research UK welcome are 2 of the big UK charities. There's many more. So, of course, they don't fund companies, but they do fund infrastructure, which again, opportunities to partner with. Everything in the red dotted box is our National Institute for Health and Care Research. There are a couple of funds that are available to companies, but in the main, this is all goes to academic and NHS partners. And importantly, the Health Innovation Networks, and they are a key delivery partner for our Health Innovations NHS service, and they operate at a regional level in England, about 3 to 5 million population each, and they are really tasked with getting the best innovation adopted as quickly as possible in the NHS. At the bottom, we've got our regulators. MHRA I've mentioned, NICE I've mentioned in terms of health technology assessment, and if you have a service, be it for healthcare or social care, they are regulated by the Care Quality Commission. I just highlight the health tech research centres. Government put the 42 million into these. 11 of them were already existing, but they've been added to. And again, they're very good for medtech because they look at things in terms of across the care pathway. They operate at a regional level, but as a national network. And they often are very helpful in terms of looking at the efficiency within a care pathway, and some more of the evaluation in terms of the economics of a product in the care pathway. And you can see that they cover a number of specialist areas. We can give you more information about that if you're interested. The innovation service I mentioned, so this was only launched last year, but it's very much to help innovators get through the system and get the support they need as quickly and efficiently as possible without having to repeat things all the time. So there's a lot of funding information and regulatory information if you just go on to the website. It's free to register for anyone around the world. And then what happens is that all of the partners, those that are interested, that feel they can help you, or they're interested in a particular product or service, they will then make contact with you through the portal and see how things can be taken forward. So we've got the regulatory agencies, we've got specialised commissioning and NHS supply, DBT does as well, but only particularly with helping you to set up companies, because the rest of them do the health system. But it also includes partners from Wales and Scotland, which is very useful. The Biomedical Catalyst is a flagship for our grant funding through Innovate UK. The current programme is of the order of 140 million. But it's there's a lot of money already gone into that, and they tend to do it in stages according to development. But at the highest development stage, you could get funding sufficient, many millions, to fund a clinical trial, for example. But that's for UK-based companies. We've got some pilot accelerators that have just been launched. Children's Health Femtech, Microbials Neurotech, so again, they may be of interest. And there's a general thing called the SMARTS grant, again, for UK registered businesses, which is for, game-changing innovations, irrespective of sector. And just a last little thing, it's really just to emphasise that there's a lot of opportunity across the UK, and at local level, we've often got additional funding support or training support. And sometimes there's also linked venture funds as well at a local level. If you engage, then potentially set up, but many of them will have hot desking opportunities before you go for a full-blown setup. And again, we've got these various things called high potential opportunities, where the local local authorities coming together to focus on a particular area where they've got extra strength infrastructure, so to speak, in that area. So that's it for me. As Brianna said, she's the lady to go to if you want help and want to explore the opportunities for the UK further. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda.
We'll stop sharing now. Thank you.
We appreciate very much your presentation. There was one question that that was asked that I thought I would just share with you about: are there advisors to help navigate an MHRA UKCA approval? Are there resources, either government or private? I'm sure there are private resources, but are there government resources as well?
Well, on the slide, which say I'll make those available, there was a link to our certification bodies. So there's, we did have a little bit of a shortage of them to begin with post-exit. So there was a bit of a queue. That's now been alleviated because we've got multiple certification bodies, and what they will do is they can go through, walk you through what's required for UKCA certification. And something like the BSA, the BSI, British Standards Institute, which does this, also has European-based organisation for CE marking. So there may be opportunities there if you're looking for dual certification.
So just looking briefly, and maybe Jim can address this a little bit in his comments as well, but based on your commentary, for a company that's interested in coming in, the National Health Service and MHRA are really the front doors. That's the gateway to having your products in the country. And if you're a drug, then you have to have approval from NICE before it can be marketed there. But if you're a device, not necessarily, but it would be nice to have NICE if you are a device.
Yeah. Every product, biopharma or medtech, has to register with MHRA and go through that process for market authorization. NICE, if you're a drug and you want reimbursement, you have to go through NICE. They'll look at every single drug. Now, because we don't have a formal reimbursement system as such for medtech, that means NICE doesn't have to look at it, but there are advantages to engage with NICE with their advice service, I would suggest. And so even if you don't go through the formal NICE guidance, if you like, on the other side of the organization, what the information they'll give you is likely to be very advantageous for developing a business proposition to the NHS.
Okay, and as far as the clearance of MHRA, you have your own UK CA approval, but if you have CE mark, then that is a fast track to approval with MHRA.
Yes, and just this year, on the biopharma side, we now have an international recognition procedure, which recognises, highly competent regulatory authorities like the FDA, the Swiss, the Singapore, Canada, Japan, and the MHRA is in discussion with those same regulatory bodies to see what might be done around medtech as well for this, international recognition procedure, which might speed things along even quicker for market access.
And I assume that's possible because of Brexit. That's
yes, I think post Brexit, the UK is looking to do more innovative things, shall we say? Now it has the freedom to do it.
Right. Well, with that, we will invite Jim McCullough, the CEO of Renalytix, to share a little bit about his experiment there, and then experiment, probably the wrong word to use, right, Jim?
It depends. Been interesting markets, so you could call it an experiment.
Okay, we'll go there. And one other question you might talk about, Jim, because I think you've maybe had some experience on this, is getting reimbursement for products in the UK. But tell us a little bit about your experience, and then we'll come back to maybe the reimbursement question.
Yeah, so we formed Renalytix in 2018 to take a look at early chronic disease prognosis, which is a very important topic for all of us. Because if you understand risk of chronic disease early, then you can treat it effectively. And really early prognosis, early risk assessment in large population diseases like diabetes, kidney disease, heart disease, et cetera, is really the key to controlling cost and outcome. If you don't understand the risk, and we're talking about precision medicine risk, this is not population-based risk, this is what is your risk for these large categories of diseases early, then ultimately we've already lost the war. And the vast majority of social costs that we're experiencing now comes from these large chronic disease categories like diabetes, like kidney disease, cardiovascular disease, et cetera. So we had an opportunity in 2018 with an effort led out of Mount Sinai Health System in New York City and the Joslin Diabetes Center in Boston and Harvard to put together the first precision medicine prognostic tool at the front end of chronic kidney disease. And the need here was critical because in the United States, there are somewhere in excess of 40 million individuals with existing chronic kidney disease. So they already have it, and you can't treat them all. So the question is, who's got kidney disease that matters and who doesn't? And can we find it out early? Because if we can find it out early, then there are lots of available treatments as opposed to waiting for people to progress through kidney disease and showing up in the hospital with late stage disease. And just to put a bookmark on this, one of the statistics that really took my breath away when I got into this space, and I spent several decades in oncology and cancer, but when I got into chronic kidney disease, the statistic that took my breath away is that 50% of the patients in the United States today who start dialysis, hemodialysis, which is the treatment for kidney failure, do it in the emergency room. And many of them didn't even know they had kidney disease. This is called crash dialysis. So this is obviously not the way that you want to manage a very costly disease, and dialysis right now for private insurance, the first year alone costs somewhere around $200,000. So we're talking about a very expensive condition. It's largely preventable. It's much more preventable if you catch it early, and that's where we came up with KidneyIntelX, which is actually a very sophisticated tool, which uses a blood draw, protein biomarkers, and features from a patient's electronic health record. And we put all this information into a machine learning enabled algorithm. So this is really applied artificial intelligence. The real question for us going into a highly regulated field is how do we get this into a position to be adopted widely and paid for? And we knew we had to go through the Food and Drug Administration. So we ended up doing that, and we received FDA de novo marketing authorization about 9 months ago. We now are being paid by Medicare, Blue Cross Blue Shield, a whole sequence of other insurance companies. We've generated a considerable amount of outcomes data, not just utility data, but showing that KidneyIntelX, when it's put in the real world, actually works. And it turns out in large hospital systems, KidneyIntelX not only improves kidney disease outcomes, but it also improves diabetes outcomes as measured by A1C. So all of this fits together if you get in early and understand chronic kidney disease. And fortunately, within the last few weeks, we were just included in the international kidney disease guidelines, medical guidelines, so the society guidelines. So we're now in a position for the first time where we've de-risked regulatory, we've de-risked reimbursement, we've got great outcomes data, and we're now in the clinical guidelines, and we're moving into the commercial phase. We originally listed on the UK public exchange on the AIM market, which is the emerging growth market of the London Stock Exchange, which I found to be incredibly successful as an alternative to venture capital. And we did that in 2019. We did a first round. We raised $29 million. It takes a lot of money to do everything that we've done just to get to the point where you can actually start selling a test. You got to get through FDA reimbursement, all these things. And we were able to raise enough money to kick off the process. And the UK has some very advantageous vehicles to do this, one of which is called EISVCT, Venture Capital Trust, where these are evergreen funds in the UK that are mandated to invest in emerging technologies like KidneyIntelX. And we were able to take advantage of that infrastructure, forming ourselves as a UK PLC, even though we were doing an enormous amount of business in the United States. And we were able to list on the London Stock Exchange AIM market in a relatively straightforward process. I love it because it is not that expensive relative to listing on the NASDAQ. It is I view it really as somewhat of a quasi-public listing process. You only have to report every 6 months as opposed to quarterly on the NASDAQ. There are a sequence of other advantages as well. Liability is different over in the UK versus the US. So your insurance requirements are substantially less expensive. And for the right entrepreneurial group, you end up with a distributed investor base. So you have multiple investors that come into your admission, your listing on the exchange. And you typically have one class of security. So it's all common stock, which is wonderful. And you end up with a price and you end up with common stock, an easily understood capital structure, and all the money comes into the bank up front. And it's yours to run. And if you're comfortable with a little bit of public speaking and you follow the rules and you're able to get the right legal support and accounting support, this becomes a very important ground to learn how to become a public company. And eventually, as we did, we ended up doing a cross-listing onto the NASDAQ market in much better market condition times. Those should return. But for me, it was a wonderful experience to get financed. And the UK city, which is the equivalent of Wall Street, is easy to walk around. A lot of the investors are within a clustered area. So For me, it was a much more containable process to maintain relationships with investors, continue dialogues, setting expectations, et cetera, and was very much an excellent alternative to raising venture capital money, which can be often long, and you end up with a complex capital structure. And I think entrepreneurs underestimate what it means to understand the capital structure through multiple venture capital rounds of financing. What is your stock really worth? What is the value that you're generating under what can be very complex structures? So I've been a major fan. I continue to be a major fan of the UK public markets. There have been a lot of difficulties recently, especially in our sector, medical device diagnostics, which has been substantially derated across the board. Unfortunately, in fact, I've never experienced such volatility in my career. I've been doing this a long time. I've never seen a more volatile period than we're in right now. I think this will eventually pass. I think that my, on the ground experience in the UK, talking to fund managers and analysts and other CEOs, suggests that there is a movement afoot in the UK to get very serious about supporting the AIM market, the emerging growth market. A lot of capital has flowed out of these markets, including the AIM market. A lot of fund managers have been under duress because they've had sequential fund withdrawals over a significant period, and that's caused them to have to sell positions that they want to hang on to, companies that they wanted to be involved in for the long term to satisfy redemptions. And that has continued through the volatile interest rate environment. I'm starting to see clouds lifting and some light at the end of the tunnel. A lot of the discussion among fund managers is how can we support the AIM market? Because this is a diversified market. This is where you find a lot of innovation occurring. It is a crown in the, it is a jewel in the UK crown, and a market that I think has an enormous amount of value. So I think that we may see, as Linda mentioned, significant progress on encouraging UK pension funds, which are sitting on a considerable amount of cash, to be encouraged to reinvest in this market. If I had to speculate and hope, I would hope that 2025, the cash outflow reverses. As is often the case, everything goes in cycles. And it will be game on again to fund innovative emerging technologies and take advantage of some of the wonderful vehicles. I mentioned EIS VCT, the evergreen funds that are required to invest in emerging technologies. All of this may come very much alive again. And for those considering looking at funding technologies where you have a very clear pathway with demonstrable milestones where you can identify a path to revenue, then LSE AIM is very much something that you should take a look at directly as an alternative to venture capital. In terms of the UK and European markets, it's very different than the US. Not only culturally, there are certain things which are good and bad on both sides. The market abuse regulations, which governs UK securities law in part, and the 34 Act, which governs US securities law, can be a little bit different. And melding the two is a fascinating thing. I've gotten a PhD in that with the dual listing. But I think that, understanding some of the core strengths in the cultural investing component over the UK is key. There's much more of a focus on how do we get to profitability, which I like because it keeps your feet on the ground. And I've found that as a US person who likes to take risk in the US risk culture, which is sometimes admired from the UK looking over here, it's actually a very good blend between the US risk culture and UK focus on fundamentals and how do we get to profitability. And it produces an interesting look at the business plan. Certainly has for me. So I think there are a lot of benefits to taking a look transatlantically. I think in terms of diagnostics, again, reimbursement is a very different game. Clinical adoption is a very different game over in the UK and in Europe. And I love Linda's presentation. In fact, I'm going to speak to Linda afterwards about a few things now that we're fully regulated and validated and so forth. This would be the perfect medical device for the UK, because the UK is suffering from the same levels of kidney disease that the US is. And this would be something that the NHS should completely embrace for the population, for cost control and reduction of suffering, drug prescription, et cetera. So, but the reimbursement environment is very different. Two totally different skill sets. What we're doing here in the United States to achieve Medicare reimbursement, Blue Cross Blue Shield reimbursement, FDA regulation is a very different process that takes place over in the UK. The mentalities are different in terms of the levels of expenditure around reimbursement. The value propositions are also slightly different, but we all suffer from the same chronic diseases, no matter where we're located. So we need the same types of solutions. And I'm gonna stop talking there for a minute, Calvin, because it looks like we only have about 7 minutes, and we may have Q&A, or I could continue.
Well, thank you, Jim. Let's take a break, and let me ask Linda, because with the discussion about reimbursement, where is the front door on reimbursement? Is it for devices and for diagnostics? As Jim said, it's different than it is for pharmaceuticals. And so if someone is looking to get approval for reimbursement for their product, is that through NICE and NHS? But you also have a private system and private payers in England, but the biggest part is the national health system. Is that correct?
I mean, that's correct. And clearly from the private health system, that's different. You can go straight to them. They don't have to comply with public procurement or anything like that. Reimbursement, again, to emphasize, for new drugs, they will go through NICE, and there is a formal reimbursement in the sense that if NICE have a positive guidance for that drug and ticks all their boxes, then there is a legal mandate for the NHS to provide that drug to patients, typically within 90 days, and for some cancer drugs, it sort of goes down to 30 days. So that's the very formal reimbursement process we have. It does not apply in the same way for medical technology. We haven't got that formal reimbursement, legal mandated, you must make this available, you must use this in the NHS. So what we have now is something that's sort of trying to move towards a more formal reimbursement process. I mentioned the MedTech mandate, which is where products are being reviewed. Those are seen by NICE. And if they tick those 3 boxes that I mentioned earlier in terms of, NHS affordability, cost saving, and meeting the general requirements, then they could be on the MedTech mandate. And that means typically that at national level, those products would be funded for use for 1 to 2 years, and an evidence base built up to show that they are working, they are cost effective, they are benefiting patients, etc., etc. And with a view then to a local level, the commissioners taking it on directly. So that's really how it works. And again, depending on the products, you get onto a one of these frameworks. So that we've got a pathology framework for some diagnostics, for example, and that's where the products is ticking all the boxes on regulations. There's a business proposition that works for the NHS, but it's still the case that at a local level, a trust level, or a regional level, they would then look to go to that framework in some cases, but they can go direct. The NHS trusts can go direct, primary care can go direct. But I think, as James probably alluded to, although it's one NHS, we do have this slightly piecemeal approach, particularly with innovative products. So it's important, I think, to get into the innovation system so this medtech mandate, you know, if you can get in the innovation system, and that's sort of on that picture I showed, then all of the new innovations coming along are being reviewed under NICE, and then they will see things that are starting to look good, and then they can get put forward with some of the other partners involved for potentially going on to the medtech mandate.
Great. And I would say if anyone has an additional question you'd like to post, either Jim or Linda, put it in the chat or just take your microphone off and we'll let you ask the question directly. And while we're waiting to see if anyone does that, just I would comment that for those who may have an interest in pursuing this further, obviously we've been at a very high level today, given overview to explain that there are opportunities, especially post-Brexit in UK, for marketing products and accessing that market. And the market, as Jim said, is very different than it is here, very different mindset, but we do have experts here who can help guide that process. And BioUtah is pleased to partner with the UK offices, the Department of Business and Trade, and making this more accessible to our companies. So anyone who does have an interest, we can get you in touch with Brianna, we can get you in touch with Linda. There is a significant interest in providing innovative products to the residents of the UK that can be that are being manufactured and designed here. So anyone have any other questions before we end our meeting today? Well, Linda and
together, Kelvin.
Linda, James, Brianna, thank you very much for taking the time. We've recorded this, so we'll be posting it so that others can have access to it. But more important than anything is we're pleased with the partnership that's been established and the pathway that is now available for those who would like to move forward to explore the UK as an as a market. So thank you everyone for being on the call today.
Thank you, Kelvin, and
Thank you.
we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's everybody.
Yeah.
So we had about 8 or 9 people who signed up that didn't end up joining, but we'll make sure they get a copy of the recording. And I thought it was really helpful. I mean, I learned a lot. I feel like I can be more conversant now in opportunities and understanding the overall system and knowing that there are even, I mean, you brought up things I wasn't even aware of about funding that could be available. So very, very good information. So really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Agreed. And I thought the questions between just, you know, Linda, James, and even you, Kelvin, were quite nice.
Yeah.
We got to really dig into some details. So
Yeah. Thank you very much, Kelvin.
Hey, Linda, look forward to meeting you in person someday.
Yes, I hope so.
Okay.
let's go to the UK. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Chat soon, Brianna.
Chat soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.